Hey y'all, I'm Allie. I'm a new nurse starting in the ICU. I just passed my boards a couple weeks ago, and I want to talk to y'all about how to choose what kind of nurse you want to be when you graduate. Alright, so I was gathering my thoughts about this topic, and I ended up realizing that I wrote my notes on the back of my resume. So I was just doing all this. I'm not an expert, but I lived it. I just lived it, so I kind of have this, several months that I spent dwelling on it. So I kind of wanted to make a video on what kind of things you should consider when you're thinking about what kind of nurse you want to be, and then if I want to modify it later I can, but I definitely have a fresh perspective on this. I'm definitely starting in the ICU. I always consider myself an ICU nurse for several reasons, but this video isn't all about me. It is about y'all figuring out what kind of nurses you want to be. So I want to start these tips with number one, some realism. What motivated you to choose nursing as a career? Now, I know the canned reason why people think you should be a nurse, and I think a lot of people write their essays on how, when they try to get into nursing school, like, I want to save people, I want to help people, I'm just a really selfless person, those kinds of essays. But it is okay to want to be a nurse for other reasons. Nursing is the most stable and flexible career that I can think of. Everybody needs nurses. You can move with whatever significant other or family member needs to move for their job. You can move with them and find another job as a nurse in that same field. So it is very flexible and very stable. I want y'all to consider why you got into nursing and choose your first job, what kind of nurse you are, based on those parameters. Like, maybe as a new grad you really prioritize your schedule and your lifestyle, so you might really want that floor nursing thing where you work 3 days a week and you have 4 days off. Or maybe you might think, I don't want the chaos of not quite knowing what day I have on or off. You might not want to work holidays, so you may be considering the kinds of nurses that work from 8 to 4 in those settings. Also, when you're considering what motivated you to choose nursing, also consider if you have any next steps you're thinking about. That could be nurse practitioner school. You may want to go back for your PhD and become a professor, or you may want to be a CRNA, a certified nurse anesthetist that works with the anesthesiologist. And usually if you want to be a CRNA, you have to, well, you don't have to, but it's good if you have intensive care unit ICU experience. So if what motivated you to choose nursing was an eventual career as a CRNA, for example, you might want to become the kind of nurse that works in the intensive care unit ICU. And some people choose nursing because they eventually want to go to medical school. So think about that kind of flexibility with taking prerequisites to go to medical school and going to those interviews. So all of this is really individualized, but that's kind of the realism I wanted to put in number one of nursing. What motivated you to choose nursing in the first place? That's really number one when you're considering what kind of nurse you want to be. All right, the second tip that I leaned pretty heavily on. Saki. I had to kick my dog out because she was chewing on a bone louder than I have personally ever heard it. We'll see if that's popular with her. She might start crying outside the door. Second tip that I personally really leaned on when it came to choosing what kind of nurse I wanted to be is what interests you. And that might be kind of a duh moment, like, okay, yes, what interests me? But the way I like to think about it and explain it to people is, what articles do you click on? Like on social media or on the internet, if you read a headline, healthcare related, what makes you click on it? Is it adorable neonatal ICU baby success stories? Is it cancer related? Is it car crashes? That sounds a little morbid, but the news reports on it, and I think it's a good idea of what interests you, because people don't normally think about, I really think trauma and ortho is the way for me to go, because I like reading about how people recovered from car crashes. But if you think about what do you normally spend your time clicking on, what do you like to hear about, what success stories make you smile, it is a good way to figure out what interests you in the healthcare field. Where do you insert yourself in a story? What makes you read it and think, I wish I knew more, I wish I had been a part of that? For me personally, the brain has always been fascinating to me. I would read these young adult novels about how people were aware when they were in a coma. I don't know how, the authors didn't have that much medical knowledge, some of them, but some of them it was really cool. Just things to do with the brain and how the brain heals itself after injury was really intriguing to me. So those would be the articles I clicked on. You know, turns out man wakes up after 30 years in a coma and thinks he's in high school again. That is really interesting to me. So a lot of those stories could be found in the intensive care unit, and I wanted to be in that room. That's what made me pursue intensive care unit with kind of a neuro focus. That book that I really loved as a teenager, I think it was called If I Stay. It also had a sequel. There's some good stuff. Man, I miss reading. So yeah, what interests you? What makes you click on the article? I think that gives you a more objective sense into what would really make you want to get up and come to work. I think the biggest and most obvious example is a lot of nurses knew they wanted to be labor and delivery or mother baby nurses before they even started considering nursing school. Like, that would always be the article they clicked on, something about new babies. That is a factor in determining what kind of nurse you want to be, what interests you. So my third tip would be, what are your strengths? I think if you look at the age groups of the people you gravitate towards, that's perfect for considering nursing fields. So for example, were you always the one people were calling to babysit? That's a cliche, but it's true. All the pediatric nurses I know were the babysitters, were the nannies, and they lived for that. Maybe you always wanted to be a teacher, or people would tell you you make a good teacher, so that older pediatric group, or maybe that means you should go be a nursing professor, or if you wanted to be a college professor. Maybe you find that volunteering at long-term care facilities is really fulfilling for you, and you could listen to the stories that people have to tell you all day. I'm very socially awkward, or I was. I'm getting a little better, but so I always thought I could never volunteer or work in places that they want to talk to you, but oh my gosh, 90 years of life experience. You could talk to me all day if you had 90 years of life experience. I want to hear those stories. Start looking at nursing careers in those areas. What are your strengths? What age group do you connect with? What walks of life do you connect with? With nursing, the strengths come from communication. So when I ask what are your strengths, what I'm probably really asking is what are your communication strengths? Where do you feel like you connect with people the most? All right, fourth tip. I'm like cheating. I'm looking at my notes down here. All right, fourth tip. This is fun. What career did you consider before you considered nursing? Some people wanted to be a nurse for a long time, so it goes maybe all the way back to when they were a kid. If you wanted to be a nurse when you were a kid, then congratulations, you're probably in the right field. But some people, if you go back to when you were a kid, then what did you want to be? Did you want to be a firefighter or an EMT? In that case, you might want to consider things in the emergency field, whether that's the nurses that are on the life flight helicopters or the emergency room. We always need more of those nurses. Some other careers that you might consider may not feel like they're nursing related, but nurses are everywhere. If you wanted to get into technology, some kind of computer-based like coding, the healthcare sector needs nurses that start as a nurse and get that floor experience and then go work for those like charting companies like Epic. They hire those people. Maybe you wanted to be a lawyer, they're nurses in the courtroom. Maybe you wanted to go into business. Nurses can really bring some great ideas to the table when it comes to business. When you get to those kind of careers that I would consider a second nursing career, In that case, the kind of nurse you want to be might be a more broad, getting that floor nursing experience, bedside nursing. You'll want to look into those 12-hour shifts where you can bring that nursing knowledge into wherever you want to go next. So yeah, everywhere from the more obvious firefighter to lawyer, if that was a career you considered or are still considering, then that can really influence what kind of nurse you want to be right out of nursing school. All right, my 5th tip would be to make a list of priorities. I got my cheat sheet out for this one because I wrote some stuff down. A list of priorities that I would consider would be the area of nursing, what we're considering right now, what kind of nurse you want to be, day shift or night shift, or that weekly schedule. Do you want to work 9 to 5? That's a priority. Hospital or employer, that's pretty important to me. I go off of reputation. I like hospitals that are a certain magnet status or that I've heard have a good patient to nurse ratio. That's a priority. Location or city is important to a lot of people. If you want to travel around, then you might want to get that experience to become a travel nurse, so that will end up being a priority for you. The 5th one is like a baby priority, money or salary. That's location dependent. It's very market controlled, so it won't be as much of a player for a new nurse. Usually if you're looking at 3 hospitals that are all down the street, they're going to be paying about the same for the kind of nurse that you're looking into, and a labor and delivery nurse doesn't typically make less than an ICU nurse, doesn't typically make more than a medical surgical nurse or OR nurse. You get the picture. Nurses in Los Angeles, California, and New York City, New York make more money than nurses in Austin, Texas. Of course, the cost of living in those cities are different, so you'll want to start doing those Google searches and trying to see if you can pin down what kind of salary you're looking at for each place, but it's going to be a little more difficult, so that's why I kind of call that the baby 5th one. Money and salary is important. You gotta eat, you gotta live, but when you're a brand new grad nurse, you're not going to have as much negotiating power with your salary right off the bat. It's pretty standardized. So my 6th tip, number 6, is to be okay with changing your mind. You're not clairvoyant. I could sit here and tell you the typical basic advice, like if you really like an experience in clinical, then you should be that kind of nurse. Yes and no. Maybe that one day you get to shadow in the ICU, the nurse you shadow is really busy or really doesn't want you to be there. I don't necessarily want to say that you shouldn't be an ICU nurse because you had a bad few days in the ICU as a student. Know that whatever you choose, nursing is flexible enough for you to change your mind. Maybe you'll get to day 1 as a nurse on a transplant floor and go, it is driving me crazy to gown up in isolation, gown and gloves all the time. Oh my gosh, get me out of here. That's okay. You can change your mind. That's what's great about nursing. Nursing is like a web. I just went everywhere. It's really just a web of all these different specialties and areas of nursing where you have more autonomy or maybe you want less autonomy. It's just a lot to choose from. The idea that you're going to make the right choice for you the first time is not guaranteed, and that's totally fine. Being a nurse is a vocation for a lot of people. It can be heavy, it's a responsibility, so it is really a gift that we get to choose what kind of nurse we want to be, but we also get to change our minds and move around. It's such a flexible career. So definitely don't put too much pressure on yourself. All right, those are my 6 personal rules for figuring out what kind of nurse you want to be as a new grad. It's a really exciting time for me, and I know it is for a lot of people too. If you found this video helpful and you think it would help someone else as well, please share it, like, comment, do what we're supposed to do, I guess, on YouTube. And I'm really looking forward to talking a bit more about the NCLEX and all those crazy things when you transition from a student nurse to a nurse. It happens really fast. Just let me know what you want to see from me in the future. I can put my Instagram link below, and I think I'll also have a website going up soon that I can kind of get feedback and see what I should best do going forward. Thanks, y'all.